let's get you all into the conversation here. Greg in Chicago. Hey, Greg, your thoughts on climate change?
Hey, Tom. Thanks for taking my call. I hear you say this repeatedly because I do listen to you frequently about the population. I mean, okay, so what does the planet handle? Who picks that number?
Well, I can give you a couple of fairly useful metrics. If you look at the population curve of the planet Earth from, say, the time of Christ to today, okay, when Jesus was walking around loose 2,000 years ago, there were about 250 million people, 250 million people on the planet. Over the next 1,000 years, around the year 1000, we just about doubled that. We got to 500 million. And then over the next 1,000 years, actually, or 800 years to the year 1800, we added another 500 million. So we got all of human history. Actually, you can go back 165,000 years. All of human history finally produced 1 billion people in the year 1800. Okay, that's 1 billion people. All of those people. And we had quite an impact on the planet. In 1800, the world was well populated. North America had been occupied by Europeans. South America was being occupied by Europeans. We were all over the planet. We were pretty much everywhere. And that was still 1 billion people. But we were all living on current sunlight. We ate food that was grown from sunlight that did that food. Our clothing was made from contemporary sunlight, cotton, wool, things like that. Our fuel sources were almost exclusively wood, and so wood is contemporary sunlight. It's like at the worst 100 years old, a couple hundred years old. So we were all living on contemporary sunlight up until 1800. In the 1800s, I mean, it really started like 800 years before that in a small way, but in the 1800s, we got really aggressive about mining coal. And this led to the Industrial Revolution in the 1860s. And actually the age of steam in the 1820s and the 1830s. And so we got really, really successful at taking coal, which is 300 million year old sunlight, plant matter, taking ancient sunlight. Now, instead of using contemporary sunlight, we started using ancient sunlight and converting that into food, basically, for us. In other words, we could transport food more efficiently, with the railroads and things like that. The cotton gin, we could shuck corn and shell, thresh wheat and all that kind of stuff. So we got more efficient with that. That led to the second billion human beings. The first billion took 165,000 years. The second billion, now that we were using ancient sunlight in the form of coal, took 130 years. Okay, so in 1930, the year Franklin Roosevelt was sworn into office, there were 2 billion people on the planet Earth. 1932. Only 2 billion people. During that time, we had started to get really successful at using other forms of ancient sunlight. In 1865, Colonel Drake drilled the first successful commercial oil well in Titusville, Pennsylvania. By the 1890s, the Rockefeller and his buddies, had figured out how to turn oil into kerosene, and we were powering everything with kerosene. And we were starting to have cars, and things were starting to move around. Cars were new inventions. I mean, a lot of towns still had horse-drawn carriages and horse-drawn even public transportation in 1930, when our second billion. But we were starting to get really efficient at using liquid ancient sunlight. Oil is ancient sunlight that's 300 million years old, too. So our third billion people didn't take 165,000 years like our first did, and it didn't even take 130 years like our second billion did. Our third billion people took only 30 years. The year Jack Kennedy was sworn in 1960, we hit 3 billion people. By this time, we were getting really efficient at using ancient sunlight and turning it into food. We had learned how to, in those 30 years, we had learned how to convert oil into fertilizer and into pesticides and into herbicides. And so we could convert oil into food much, much more efficiently. And you had the Green Revolution as a consequence of this. So our third billion was 1960, and then we really took off. The fourth billion took only 14 years, 1974. The fifth billion took only 13 years, 1987. The sixth billion took only 11 years, 1990, whatever that would be. The seventh billion we're into right now, and there's this exponential curve that's happening. We are going to hit our own capacity to produce food out of oil, basically, sometime in this century. I mean, there's just there is a wall there because we're seeing this incredible slope. But to give an honest answer to the question, what is the appropriate carrying capacity of the planet in terms of human biomass? We have now, by the way, exceeded termites as the single largest form of single species protoplasm on Earth, human beings. There's more of us than there is cockroaches. It's not numerically, but in terms of biomass. So, and we are consuming more than 50% of all the fresh water on the planet, and we're consuming more than 60% of the net photosynthetic output of the planet, all of the plant matter that is converting sunlight into cellulose and sugars. And so we have crowded out all these species. This is what Richard Leakey wrote about in his book, The Sixth Extinction. We're making all these other things extinct because we're converting oil, ancient sunlight, oil, gas, natural gas, coal, into food, basically. So if you really want to know what the carrying capacity of the Earth is with regard to the human race, I would look at before we began using ancient sunlight. And that would be 1800. And I would say, that 1 billion people, probably an appropriate population for the planet Earth is 1 billion people. And if we were to, and now this is not practical, of course, but if everybody on Earth said, okay, our families are only going to have one child, and every couple, starting tomorrow, had only one child, by the year 2100, the population of the planet Earth would be at 1.7 billion people, which I think is sustainable, especially if we had the new technologies that were using sunlight directly, like photovoltaic cells and things, and we were completely off the carbon cycle. And we would also be making room for the rest of life around us. That would be highly sustainable. Am I making sense here, Craig?
How would you... Well, I mean, is it, again, the population driven off the food that we can produce to support the population?
Right.
But to sit there and to say that we want to tell Russia, China, I mean, how do you even come about with that thought?
Well, China actually did it with their one-child policy, but they, here's the actual technological solution. Historically, what people have said is that the way to reduce population is one of two things. It's either a technological answer, in other words, propagate birth control everywhere, make sure that every woman in the world has access to birth control pills, put bubblegum machines on the street corners that don't require money, just walk out and get your free birth control pill, pass out condoms everywhere. And there are actually NGOs that are doing this, that literally go into the slums of Bangkok and pass out condoms by the ton. Okay, the technological solutions, number one. And number two was economic solutions. And this was championed by conservative economists who observed that as nations got wealthy, their birth rates dropped. Japan actually has a negative birth rate right now. Their population is declining. Denmark has a negative birth rate. Sweden has a negative birth rate. The richest countries that have the highest standards of living on Earth actually have declining populations, which is a good thing because a declining population tightens the labor market, which raises wages, which raises the standard of living for everybody. So how does that happen? Well, these guys said that the way that happens is by development. So all you need to do is you need to go into the poor countries of the world where the average woman is having between 7 and 11 children, which is the much of the really poverty-stricken world, Africa, parts of South America, the Middle East, and parts of Asia. Go into those places and just develop them. The problem, have them live the lifestyle of even poverty-level Americans, $15,000 a year lifestyle, and they will then stop having so many babies. The problem is, if everybody on Earth, keep in mind, 2 billion people right now live on less than $2 a day. If everybody on Earth lived at $14,000 a year, it would take 4 planet Earths to provide the natural resources. So that's not physically possible. But even if it was, it turns out that that's not the solution. It's not that people are wealthy, because there are countries like in the Middle Eastern oil sheikdoms where you've got, like in Saudi Arabia, the average family gets about $42,000 a year just as a gift from the government every year. That's the base income. No matter what you do, here's your base income. And their wives are still having 11 children. Why? It turns out that the single thing that turns population, the thing that turns population, that reduces population, is the empowerment and education, and the two, of course, are interrelated, of women and girls. If you can go into a country and educate girls and women, then and give them power equal to men, or close to equal to men, and there's a tipping point, it seems to be around 35 or 40% of power equal to men, then suddenly family size goes from 11 down to 2. And over time, as the country gets wealthy and more prosperous and the women become more and more empowered, then it goes down to like 1.9, 1.8, 1.7, like Japan is right now. So if you want to save the world, Greg, empower women. End of rant. What do you think?
Well, again, I mean, the magical number is that who's the person that steps up and becomes king of the planet and says, this is the number I decree, and it can't exceed that.
Well, I'm just saying, here's what biology tells you. And you know, I think that using enforcement mechanisms like China did, you know, where if you have a second child, you have to abort it, or you get fined, or you can go to jail. I think that's not the way to do it. I don't think that anybody needs to be king of the world. I think what we need to be is the educators of the world. We need to be going into third world countries, and instead of bombing them, or instead of trying to convert them to our religion, or instead of trying to extract their oil, we need to be building schools all over this world for girls. Greg, thanks a lot for the call.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
And I'm telling you, with 1.7 billion people on the planet instead of 7 billion people, we would not be having a conversation about the Permian mass extinction.